Hello, everyone. I am Lina, KeokeN social media community. Today with me, I have Jill, KeokeN lead animator, and also Sophia, who flew all the way from Italy to KeokeN's office to talk to us. Nah, just kidding. Well, maybe. Sophia... Almost. Sophia is a tech game designer at KeokeN Interactive, and we are here today to have a discussion about last week's Gamescom Opening Night Live, which is a big event for everyone at the gaming industry. There were a lot of game announcements, a lot is happening, and it's such a good time for us to kind of see, can I say, a vertical slice of what the gaming industry looks like these days, would you say?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you can go into fine details, but I mean, we'll try. Yeah?
Yeah, okay. So my first question would be, what are your favorites of the games that have been showcased during the Gamescom opening night?
You want to take this one?
Yeah, okay, I can start. So my favorite ones were Alan Wake 2. Even though I'm not going to play it because it's scary, but if it wasn't scary, I would 100% play it if I wasn't such a coward. Then I remember the name of this one, the cute one that we said, this looks different. It was an indie one.
The Little Nightmares?
No, the one right at the end about friendship and...
Was it called The Good Thing You're Here? No.
That one was great as well, but no, not that one. The one right before. It was about these guys, his friends, doing a road trip.
What was the name of it? I know exactly what you're talking about, but I don't remember the name of it. Yeah, it's kind of like Borderlands and Life is Strange kind of mix up in terms of like style and the story thing. Ooh. Yes. So this one got you excited as well. Okay, good. Curious. I really like the Wish thing. What's it called? Thank goodness you're here, I think.
Yes, that one looked so funny.
I really like what they did with the trailer, so it instantly got me interested in what it's going to be like. Jill, what about you? What are your favorites?
For me, it's definitely the ones that stood out more of like in an artistic direction, and not so much for me the games that I really want to play. Because as a developer, that's the thing that I'm interested in, right? Like, what's the competition doing, and how can we set the next standard for gaming? So for me, it was the Grand Blue Fantasy one, because I feel like there's like a really strong art direction in there, and it really stood out from most of the different other games. I mean, there were a few more that I really liked, which was like the Little Nightmares one, Little Nightmares 3. And I really liked the cartoony one at the end that we just discussed. So glad you are here or something.
Thank goodness you're here. Yeah, I think it's called that too. Ooh, all right, cool. This is interesting. I think I'm going to start the discussion with... let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? Starfield. Starfield is very soon. That was, of course, one of the biggest. We cannot just ignore it and not talk about it. We've seen quite a bit of it. The performance was beautiful, right? They've also started with the live performance of the composer, which was really great. What are your thoughts on the game? Do you have any expectations? And I'm asking you as game developers, right? Because you have this unique perspective on the games and the gaming industry.
Yeah, so for me, it's definitely two things to take into consideration when you see these things. Like, I always like to try to separate the game developer from the game, actually, because the game developer has a set of precedents for whenever they release a game that, you know, it's a Bethesda game, right? So you always have to get some community feedback, and it's a process of evolution, even beyond the fact of the release of the game. I can still fondly remember a lot of things from playing Skyrim, but now if I would play it 10 years later with a lot of mods, for example, in the community and everything that they bring to the game, it's just so much more than what it originally was. So I think the promise of that with Starfield is really exciting. It doesn't straight up wow me yet, because there's an air of mystery behind the game, and I like my game trailers to be more upfront about what it is. So I'm a little bit hesitant, but I know people who are going to buy it, so I'm definitely going to watch and see it. I think it's definitely very interesting from the perspective of, the power fantasy of going to, a different planet, going to Mars of all places. For example, I think that's very interesting to explore further. I don't think a lot of games do that yet. So in that sense, I think it will grasp a lot of people. But yeah, as a gameplay technical aspect, I would love to hear Sophia's ideas about that. But I'm really curious and eager to find out.
I agree with you when you said that we don't really know yet what the game is going to be, right? So I don't really have such high expectations because I don't know how it's going to be like. And so I am excited because it's a genre of games that I like. So as a player, I'm interested in this. But from a perspective more of design and mechanics, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know anything about it. So I'm still very much waiting to see how it actually is.
Actually, I have a question for you then, because as a game designer and knowing the background of Bethesda games, with whatever you've seen from Starfield, what do you expect the game to be? Like if you can just grab tidbits from different games that they've worked on.
Well, I expect it to be very much open world and that prompts exploration, but all related to a story, right? So that's what I expect it to be, which would be in line with every other Bethesda game we've played. Which could be like that. Maybe they will add some more innovation to it. I don't know. I would like if they did. If they did something different, then I would be happy for them. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that they really said, like, they really bank on the fact that it's a new IP. So I'm like, is it really a new game? Or is it just like, for example, Skyrim in space, just where is the newness? And I'm really interested in finding out what that means for us as gamers.
Is it just a reskin or is it an actual new thing? So we'll see. I hope it is.
I'm curious to find out together with you from what we've seen so far, and I think we've seen a bit more during the Summer Game Fest rather than the Gamescom Open Night Live. But they did show, like my expression was that it's million games in one rather than just one game. There was so much out there that was going on. There was the exploration, then there was the fighting, base building, then you also build your own ship and you design your own ship and everything is supported. And they've showed this massive amount of gameplay mechanics. How viable would you say it is? Is it possible to put 12 different games into one?
I mean, I guess if you have a lot of people and a lot of money, you can do it, but I'm hesitant about it, which is actually something that we noticed also in all of the trailers. Not all of them, but most of them. There were so many games that had so much stuff into it. It was hard to understand exactly what the main purpose of the game was, what was the goal, what was the game actually about, because so many of them, in the trailers at least, they had so many things that you could do. So
yeah, I'm a true believer of like contained freedom. So you have the freedom to do everything you can, but designers have designed the game in the sense that it's always directing you within all of that freedom that you have. I think that's also the reason why Cheers is getting one of the best design.
So you're saying they kind of promise you full freedom, but it never is. It never truly is full freedom. There is always borders that they kind of keep you within.
Which I think it's good, right? How can you make to make an actual game where you can do everything? You would need an insane amount of resources. So nobody expects that. But.
And then it's just a game sandbox, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, sandboxes we've had there was this period of, sandboxes was the next best thing, and all the creative freedom, whatever you want to do in the game, you can just do, games like Goat Simulator and stuff like that. But at some point, it's just a ways to generate content. But as a gamer, at some point, the value of the game starts to dip, and that's okay because there are a lot of other games to play. But I feel like for games like this, I think to keep the player retention going, I think it's really good to keep boundaries in there. I think as game designers, especially, you can attest to that. I think it's very important to have your games being directed in a certain
100%. Yeah.
direction.
Speaking of the game that has million mechanics in one, Crimson Desert, that was also a game. I watched the trailer and it just kept giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. What are your thoughts on that game when you saw it?
That was actually the one I was thinking about also, because at first I was like, oh, this looks cool. This looks cool. Oh, wow, you can do that. Oh, you can do also that. So you can do everything. And so at the end, I was like, I'm not sure what to think, because how can it be very good, right? If you have so many things, but we'll see. Maybe it's going to be very good. I just wonder about what's the spike? What's this thing that makes the game special? Because I didn't feel like there was anything from that trailer, but
also there's definitely a trade-off here to think about, because you could either be a jack of all trades or you can just have a focused gameplay loop, right? And I think in this sense it's really hard to do a jack of all trades thing in the world that we're living in, with so many games that can do everything in a specialized manner. Like, doing too much can also be a detriment. Like, it's very cool to be able to fish, but if it doesn't go as deep as, for example, a different game that has a very expanded fishing mechanic, you're just gonna play that game. Or, do you want a game that just touches upon like a low level surface type of gameplay, right? And just have everything maybe, but then the gameplay isn't necessarily this one thing, but it's like the experience of being outdoors and doing everything that you can, right? So that's like more of like a create your own story gameplay, instead of like, oh, this is the gameplay and you have a clear focus and you have to fish because otherwise, I don't know, the world is dying. I don't know, just making things up. Could be a game
to save the world. Yeah, why not?
You've also mentioned the trailers, right? And you've also said, because when we see the trailer for the game, it's a very important part for us as well as the game developers, as consumers, mostly as gamers. It either grasps us or it doesn't. The first question that I'm going to ask you about is using the CGI and also mixed media in creation of a trailer. What are your thoughts on it?
Personally, as an art piece, I think it's amazing. I think it's not a lazy way to do things, right? I think in the older Command and Conquer games, you also had like this little window pop up, and then there was this sort of commander that said like, you have to do this mission and you have to do this and that, and that was very tacky. Very well dressed cosplayers, almost, I would say. It was very funny. But I think in that sense, I mean, it still worked, because I think if you look at a game, there's one rule that always has to stand out there. At least that's my own philosophy on things, is that believability always is paramount in a game. If you're broken from the immersion, then it doesn't work. Like, I think Alan Wake 2 also has this, a lot of mixed media moments during gameplay, which I'm really eager to find out, which is also sad why I'm really scared of games like this, right? So we can hold each other's hands while playing,
play
right?
together, yes.
Yeah.
So
before you continue, I am currently replaying Alan Wake Remake, and they have placed the QR codes throughout the game. If you scan them with your phone, it opens you an unlisted YouTube video with a real actor behind like Alan Wake, who is typing on the typing machine and then speaks out loud the thoughts with regards of this particular chapter. It's like full fourth wall kind of breaking stuff, and I'm loving it. They haven't had it in the original, but they've implemented it in the remake, because I think the 2 was already must have been in development by that time.
Oh, that sounds so cool. So cool. I really want to play it. I don't know. Maybe we will. Maybe we will.
No, but yeah, as an art piece, I think it's really good. And I think it is only even harder to do, because you have to imagine, as game developers, you already have the assets to make a character move, right? So why would you go out of your way to put in this extra media with all the risks involved of people or players just not liking it? There's a huge risk involved. So having to do that in a believable sense, not a realistic sense, because games and realism is a huge topic to talk about, but that's something for another time. I truly believe in believability of games. And in this sense, it's really hard to do because of the mixed media. So I really can only applaud them if they do a really good job.
I think we can already applaud them just for trying.
Exactly.
Right? I think it's, when just innovation and trying new things, I think it's always worthy of respect.
And just thinking about how smart they are actually also with, like, in in real life you wouldn't expect out of this world elements to exist, but they've devised their whole narrative around it, right? Like it's this world which is his own creation and that he is trapped in, which is very interesting to think about. And then you have these alienating elements there. I think that's very, very cool, and I'm really curious to find out how they sort of did that.
Yeah, same.
It's curious because Alan Wake 2 did that with their trailer. Starfield also did that with their trailer with the actual actors. And then Mortal Kombat 1 have also recently released a trailer with actual actors, and they've got a lot of people there. And it's very curious for me to see because I don't think we're used to seeing a lot of that for the video game trailer. Movies, yes, but for video games, not so much, I guess. And this is something new.
To be honest, to hook into that conversation, I think it's a callback to the very first game, because they used to focus the people or their self, the game devs, right, with doing these moves, and then they just rotoscope them as the characters. So I really like it. Actually.
Yeah, since we are talking about Mortal Kombat 1, since we started to talk about it, how are you feeling about the fighter games? Because this year, 2023, has been big on fighting games. All of the big three, Street Fighter came out, Mortal Kombat 1 is coming out soon, Tekken 8 has been announced to come out early next year as well. What are your thoughts on them? Why do you think, would you say, all of them decided to come out like, boom, exactly like same year, instead of just like spreading out a little bit? Would there be some sort of motive? Is it just time? How does it work?
You want to take this one?
I have no idea why they would all come out together. So if you have some idea, go ahead.
I mean, we can speculate.
I mean, in my own speculation, I feel like they're not really competitors of each other. They're not working within each other's space, so they all offer something different. So that's why they can coexist pretty much like, you know, our adventure game, you know, Deliverance Mars can coexist with other adventure games. It's just that we bring something new or different to the table is what really defines us from, or sets us apart from the other competitions.
So because they all have their own identity, right? Yeah. So I agree with that.
And you mean you can argue about the quality of the games or whatever, or what you like or what you not like. I think it's a very interesting choice, and you're probably gonna ask this as well, but you know, the fan base thing, you know, destroying that fourth wall again with this is not a real world situation, these fighters in Tekken 8, but here you are as an avatar and you are doing stuff with it. It's like out of this world. How did they come up with this? It's like so interesting.
It is very interesting. I wonder what the community will make of it. Yeah.
Probably silly things if I know player bases like really well, especially fighter games. For me personally, because Jill, you said that all of the three games, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat and Tekken, they are so differ in what they have to offer. They even have different player bases. You as an animator, which style, the style of which game is closer to you personally?
I would say it's Street Fighter. It doesn't even come nearly as close to my own animation art style than you know, for example, a different game like Project L from, you know, Riot Games, or a Grand Blue Fantasy, which also has a fighting game, but also had a different trailer in this Gamescom year. But also, what's the other fighting game? Guilty Gear, you know? I can really appreciate a game that really distincts itself from the rest, and you know, that art style was really amazing. So, but I think Street Fighter 6, to pedal back to the actual question, I think that one comes close. They have a really big history of making really great animations, and you can really feel like it's an evolution of all of those games combined, right? And then coming up with the next game, and you can, even though it's very different, because you know, there are certain frames that you can hit, you know, impact frames and stuff like that, and you can play around with the timing. And I think the older games had, because of, for that time, there were different techniques. You know, you had the 2D flat characters, and now you have 3D. So you know, they sort of try to translate all of that into 3D. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. But I feel like in its essence, there is a soul still there in those new games, which you can still see. So yeah, I would say Tekken. Oh, sorry, Tekken. Street Fighter 6.
Sophia, as for you, right, as a tech game designer, fighting games to me as a consumer look like something that would not be quite difficult to develop. But then when you get deep inside in how it works, the mechanics, the frames, and when you get into the whole complexity of how they are created, I personally had my mind blown. What about you? Did you research them? Can you share a little bit of like how difficult it is? Because why does it take the people and companies years to develop a new fighter game in the same universe, with the same characters? It's like, just slap everything, just put everything together.
Yeah, it is very, very complicated. There's this theory about frame loops, minute loops, and hours loops, right, about gameplay. And fighting games are very strong on frame loops. So every frame, the player needs to be reactive and needs to be attentive to what happens. So every frame needs to be very well polished in terms of design and everything else. But especially from a design standpoint, you need to make sure that whenever the player does something, there's a reaction to it in a fighting game, right? Because the pacing is super high, super fast. You never stop during the match. So every moment needs to be curated extremely well. So it takes a long time and a lot of polish and so much testing. And even just the starting ideas, you start with an idea and you want to make it work. But then to make it work so that it's fun, so much time, so much effort, so many resources. Because every frame needs to be perfect.
Yeah, I can also imagine that like fighter games are even harder than any other game, because you can just imagine like there's a DLC pack, new characters come in with different mechanics, and then you have to do an entire rebalancing of all your other characters, because if one character is too overpowered, it could be really detrimental to your gameplay and game feel. So I really feel like that's one of the hardest things for fighting games actually, is what comes after, the first release.
Yeah, balancing is I feel like one of the hardest parts of design, also one of the most criticized one by the fan base. I think it's pretty hard for a balancing designer, because you need to test a lot and have so many info and data come in, right, from the players. And then you need to use this data to make it so that, of course, it's balanced. But when you start to have many characters, and it's so much data that you need to parse through, and it's really tough.
Important question for the gaming industry these days is that we do have a lot of remakes that have already came out and that are coming out as well. One of the remakes that have been announced is the Age of Empire 4, for example, right? And there are quite a few of them out there in the stocks as well. What are yours feeling as a game developer, obviously, on one of the biggest remakes is also Assassin's Creed Mirage, right? How could I forget about that one? This is also like big out there. What are your feelings on this? I'm going to be brave and call it the remake culture that we are kind of going through in the gaming industry these days.
I find this particularly interesting because as a game developer, I really don't like all the remakes. I feel like they generally don't add much to the art of video games. They don't really bring anything new or interesting. Of course, not for sure some remakes are going to bring something new, but mostly they don't. So I don't find them very interesting. But as a player, sometimes, if it's a game I like, then I will be excited for the remake. So also maybe, also as a game developer, then I think that maybe sometimes it's good to have a remake, but I'm very conflicted about this.
I really love it. We couldn't be further apart from this in opinion. I really love remakes for the fact that, a game is, in its time, it's made, right? So a game from 2001 doesn't play the same as a game from 2014 or, further on. And in this sense, I think it's really interesting as a game developer to see how far we have progressed. I think, most of the remakes that aren't able to bridge that gap, in player satisfaction, getting the dopamines in and everything. I feel like that's very. We had a fair share of game developers that really tried to replicate the quote unquote golden age of gaming with all the gaming mascots. Like if you have Banjo Kazooie, your Mario, your Sonic. And recently we had a few games that came out that tried to replicate that feeling, but in doing so, they also replicated some minor nuances, like annoying things like camera being too close to the character, or just not being able to go with the character, or not transitioning smoothly into a different scene or whatever. So it's funny to see like some remakes that really are not able to shake loose from the foundation of what made that game back in the 90s. And there are some, that they ditch that sort of religious view on what an old school game is, and they try to reiterate it to make it to a modern standard. And I think that's really interesting to hold them as a comparison thing. What speaks to me more is about, like, if there's a remake, what happens with DRM? What happens with the older games, right? So you have these games from, I don't know, your Diablos and your all of those cool games that you used to love and play as a kid. But what happens to the older versions? Where are they going? Are you gonna keep them, or we want to maybe stop having them being going live, for example? If you want to get more revenue because the old game is really so good still, where is that line that you want to draw as a game developer or a publisher? Because not always the game developer has this final say in this, right? So that's also a very important thing to remember. For every player that's listening to this, don't always hate the developer. There is a lot of parties involved in creating a game, and I think that's very interesting. And always stay critical about these things and do your due diligence before you say anything.
I have a question for you. Do you think we were going to hit a certain point in time where the remakes will stop? Because obviously we are right now in the era where technology allows us to redefine our old school favorites, childhood favorites, and make them look like we thought they looked like when we played them back in the day. When is going to be the point when we're going to stop making remakes? Or are we just forever stuck in the feedback loop? Games get older, then there is a remake, then gets older, and then there's another one.
I don't really think that it has to do much with gaming, but more a society thing, because we like to play the games that we play as a kid, right? That's why remakes exist, because when they get older, kids suddenly have money. So companies want to bank on the fact that, nostalgia is a really strong thing. So I don't think it's much of like a game thing, but it's more like a societal thing. And in that sense, I think remakes will never go away. But I do feel like the way we go about remakes might change. This is interesting to speculate on. And maybe you have some thoughts?
We as game developers, you mean, or we as
no, the games
players
themselves.
Okay.
They might evolve to a new standard where we sort of hint to what was old. More like I said, like abandon what made the game it is, like in the 90s, and then just go and evolve it to a new standard, because we're so used to new things. We're living in a world where dopamine and triggers are just a really big thing now. So I feel like, do we want to adapt our games to that? So in that sense, maybe games evolve, I think.
Yeah. I agree with the fact that if it makes money, then they're not going to stop, obviously, right? But also, I wonder about technology. Like, as long as technology evolves so quickly, then since it's going to be pretty even, it's not going to be a long time, right? When a game comes out, but then in not such a long time, technology has progressed so much that remaking it makes sense, because you can add so much more to it. Then I also get why you would do that, right? So it depends, I guess, yes, both on society, but also on technology.
I can see that. That's a big oversight on my part. I think it's interesting to see how far that goes, actually, because I feel like as game engines, and game tech evolves, the amount of possibilities that you can do is starting to slow down a little bit. Like, your game from the 90s, where you had a lot of even hardware issues. It's not going to be as big of a problem nowadays. Where I feel like, especially since we were talking about Bethesda, I think that's a very interesting topic as well, because they have a lot of modding communities, right, for their games. So but still they lash out, they give out like for the 10th time Skyrim, right? Like the so many at anniversary edition, which is very interesting to me, because at what point is the anniversary edition more worth than a modded first gen Skyrim? So there's a good question as well. And how much do you want to evolve, or involve, I should say, your modding community?
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
it is, because they can add a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess Starfield is going to be a really great example for us, because now the game looks beautiful, and I feel like a lot of open source material are a little bit more accessible to modders out there. So I am quite curious to go into a Starfield a year from now and see what kind of community created content there is. There's going to be a lot, and some quality of that of the things created, I'm pretty sure is going to blow our mind in terms of how it's going to be much. I mean, some people would create things better than you. Well, definitely me, but then maybe you could, that the Bethesda developers could. And this is, I think it's a beauty about it, right? Kind of like the overall community creation.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to keep in mind that we have players with different needs now. Like, I believe recently there's coming a Harry Potter show, right? So I think it's very interesting to see, because I question myself, why do these new versions of iterations of games or shows exist, right? But the demographic that's watching, these shows has changed too, because it's not just us old people. There are new children, new 12 years old, 11-year-olds that really want to dig into the Harry Potter franchise, or really want to dig into a Skyrim or whatever, right? And for them, there is no place in that franchise yet. So a new game with updated characters, or maybe they introduce new actors, or, make it more diverse, because, that's also really a huge thing now to keep in mind, that the demographic has changed. Mm-hmm. A lot of new people are listening or watching or enjoying or playing these games.
Yeah, it's a good point, because it becomes an opportunity to bring the game to more people, right? I didn't think of that. But yeah, people that would have not played the first one.
Loving it. Since we're talking about the media, we were also shown Rebel Moon. That is an upcoming Netflix show. They showed the fantastic trailer. It was hard for me to kind of make up what the show is going to be about, but little of the visual cues, they looked really good. And they didn't have anything yet. They just kind of teased it. There's like, yeah, this is what we're doing. There has been a lot of media trend descending, going from video games to movies, from movies to video games, TV shows, adaptations. Would you say that adaptations that we have so far have been successful or not really so? What, in your opinion, would you think is a key to a successful adaptation? And I think I'm mostly interested in video game going to a TV show.
Well, first of all, I love that they're doing it, because it's usually you make a video game out of a show or a movie or a book, but now it's the opposite, right? You make a show
at the same time.
Yeah. So it's I personally love it. I don't think it's easy to do well, but in general, I would say that changing, an adaptation, so changing a form of media from one to another, it's never easy. But I think it brings an opportunity to deepen the meaning of the piece of media itself, like The Last of Us, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. I love the video game, and the show added to it. It didn't take, it only added, and that was beautiful in my opinion.
I think it's interesting to look at it from an influence perspective. So you have these different medias, and how are they going to influence each other? Because they're all simultaneously being made, right? So at some point, it's all going to be released, and you're going to have a question like, what came before and who influenced what? Because typically you would say like, okay, your game A was released, and then movie about game A comes, and you're like, well, yeah, they did it, but they couldn't really grasp the feeling of the game, and you get in this loop of questions of why is it bad or why is it so good, right? And was it because it was already an established franchise? in a game or a movie or whatever came first, right? But now it's developed at exactly the same time by one director. I mean, Zack Snyder. I mean, come on, like this is such, as an art piece, this is interesting. I'm not quite sure if it's, from a financial standpoint, it's really smart to bank on this IP without it being proven, but then already make a movie or a show, a game, all at the same time. So when you think about it, if one of these flop, it could drag the rest down. It could be the best show ever, but if the game flops and it's released simultaneously, that will have an impact, whether that's big or small. It is a risk, and this, it's a negative side of things. But as an art piece, I really like it. Yeah.
I have a question for both of you. Should the TV show follow the story of the game precisely, just like it was? So basically, it's like a one big cutscene, though maybe an expanded cutscene, but it's exactly as it is. Or should it add something new to it? Because for me, I have a question. If I am watching a show and I already know what's going to happen in game in terms of the story and everything, but I'm just watching it with real life actors, where's the value in this if I already know what's going to happen and all of the plot twists and everything? However, a lot of people do get angry if there are any deviations from the original plot. If something added that's not originally been added, a lot of people can say, that's not canon. This is not how it was in our universe. Where do you stand on this question?
I stand very firmly on the side that you can't adapt. You can go from one media to the other and do the exact same thing. I don't think there's a way to make that beautiful in both cases. Like if something works as a video game and you want to do it as a TV show, it cannot be the same because they're not the same form of media. They don't use the same tools. They don't communicate to the player/viewer in the same way. So they need to be different. Absolutely.
It's not really need to be different. It's more like they can't be the same, right?
Exactly.
And the way we digest these two medias are so different. There is a lot of immersion involved in the fact that you have a controller in your hand and you have control of that character. So the player's ability to play the game is translated to the game. So that experience is already very different from something that's super linear, right? You're just watching the movie and it's being directed by the director. And the game is being directed by you. I mean, the game devs have made a way to direct you in a direction, but on a microscopic level, you are directing the game a little bit yourself as well, because who tells you to go into that alleyway? Instead of just going on the highway and go from point A to point B, maybe you want to go through the alleyway and figure your way out, do stuff in between, and then arrive at point B. And that's a little bit of should I say microcosm of stories? I think that's very interesting, and that makes a game very unique in the fact that it can create your own story in that sense. A movie is a little bit different, but in that sort of tightness of a movie where it's so hard directed, a lot more can be input, because as a player you have so much control to break the game, so it needs to be set up differently than a movie. In a movie, you have 100% control.
Yep, absolutely.
That's why the experience is always different.
I have a curious point that you have pointed out about the believability in game experience and finding the balance between fantasy and grounded reality. For me personally, I've noticed that quite a lot. I'm not going to say any names because I don't want to hurt anyone, but in general, it's like the general feeling that kind of haunted me ever since Summer Game Fest is that I see a lot of trailers and I just cannot find myself to care enough about what's going on the screen. They set some sort of conflict, something that has to be resolved. There is a character, a protagonist, they show an antagonist a lot, and I look at it and say, that's all like fairy tale, that none of this would like ever happen, and I find myself lacking interest to ever dive deep into that story and then find out what's out there, because I know that for me, they're already telling me, yeah, you're dreaming, and by the time the story is over, you're going to wake up and find out that it's a dream. What is your take on the balance between what's hardcore reality and to fantasy for people to care about?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, like I said, reality really doesn't exist in a game, in my opinion, at least. You can call something realistic, but it's never there, and believability is very important in that fact, like you said, to immerse the player while still having fantastical elements in the game. So if I can grab a game as an example, there was the trailer for the sequel to Black Desert, Crimson something. What is it called again?
Crimson Desert?
Was it Crimson Desert?
Yeah, what's it called,
Yeah.
Chris? I don't know. And actually, we all know that which game we're talking about. So at least we three do. I'm sorry for the listeners or the viewers, but there were some guys jumping around, and then all of a sudden, that's very realistic. So wow, a guy jumping, I don't care. And then all of a sudden, there was this burst, and he did sort of a boost forward, and I was like, oh, but this is cool, right? And there's a very striking balance, of course, between the world and its fantasy elements and what we what we perceive as grounded reality, right? And in that sense, I feel like this can still exist in our world as well. But I think the tying together of fantasy and realism in a game is very, very hard to do. But that's what makes games fun, right? Because nobody wants to look and sit down and have a controller in their hands and play a character that can jump exactly 1.7 meters, right? Like nobody wants that. No, everybody wants to have that character that has an augmentation on their feet that can jump 2 meters up. And in that sense, I feel like also the gaming community as a whole is sort of maturing in that sense, that they have a more keener sense of what they want out of a game. And you can definitely see that with a lot of games that have beautiful graphics, they want to set the newest standard for realism, right? But they often forget about the fun of the game. And then if they have gameplay elements, they maybe also tend to sometimes forget or be as less successful to interweave gameplay in there, because there's a certain amount of realism that you can attain and then also have game logic in there, right? So being able to interweave that is an art of its own, and that's very interesting. We definitely tried, and I think we've managed with Deliver Us Mars. So if you haven't played that, go play it, or at least watch something of it, but definitely play it and to support us. But sorry for the...
It's perfect. It's all good.
But yeah, no, I think it's important for game developers to be very critical about those elements. Like, I definitely feel like the Crimson Desert example is a very good one, because there is a lot of high fantasy elements. And for that world to exist with those movability abilities, like jumping up and then dashing in midair, it works. I believe it. I believe it because of the animation. I believe it because of the timing of the gameplay elements interweaving with each other. I believe it because of the narrative behind it, and that's so important.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about setting rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
You set some rules at the start of the game, that's the rules that you set, that you tell the player, this is the circle you're in, or this is your magic circle. These are the things that can happen, and as long as everything that you do afterwards is inside these rules, or even if it breaks them, right? Could be a twist, right? Oh, actually, now you can do this thing happens that's different from everything you've seen. But as long as you do it in a way that doesn't break the circle, then I think you can do anything. It doesn't need to be, you can start realistic and then, bam, no, actually there's magic. But it all depends on how you do it. You just need to set some rules and keep the player inside the magic circle.
There's one game that springs out to me, and that's Forspoken. I want to keep it short, but I think it's a Japanese term called isekai, from going from a real world to a magical place. I think that's very interesting, and I thought that they really did that part of the game really good, and I really like that, because it sort of ties together it lures in the player. Because we all know and are used to what's a rural New York like, right? And then having that reality sense broken, but then still, have all these powers that you can just all of a sudden play, because it makes sense in that world. So in a sense, it felt to me like Forspoken had two circles, and I think that they bridged the gap pretty nicely. Mm-hmm. Think of what you want about the game, but in that sense, I feel like they did a really good job. Yeah.
I have a big there's like a big chunk in the notes that I've created and that you've created talking about the technical aspects of the game, like UI in games, particles, effects, night vision, etc. I'm just going to wrap it around in a little bit of a question where you can cover everything or nothing, but hopefully everything, is because we do have technologies evolving, we have software evolving, we have engines evolving. Nothing is as it used to be like 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? Things are constantly changing. Hardware, we also get introduced with new hardware as well too. And of course, a big one is of course Unreal Engine 5 that everyone's been talking about and utilizing as well too. For you, do you feel like there is a tendency in video games these days that you see maybe from trailers of the new titles, things that are being utilized more, a lot, that kind of everybody's trying to achieve these days? Kind of like more, as I said, vertical slice of things. What are games these days look like based on the software and hardware available to game developers?
I think there's a strong direction towards realistic graphics in general. A lot of the games that we saw are just very realistic, and they all kind of look the same, with very few exceptions.
Yeah, no, I feel like in that sense, as technology progresses, you tend to see some overlap between games because we're all used to now getting the convenience of game engines to our labs. Like it's almost for free to get into it, and then later when you get successful with your game, you have to pay a certain amount. I think in that sense, because of the approachability of game content, I think you can, definitely, like I said, you can see some overlap, and that's part shame, but it's also part beauty, because I think it's amazing that like a team like us with a few people, and maybe a little bit more, but around 20 people can just make a very creating and convincing and fun-looking game, because we have the technology that we have nowadays. And yes, it's a little bit sad that the creative portion might get lost a little bit because most of the teams lean a little bit more on the graphical capabilities of that engine. But and obviously you can go beyond that. You have a lot of Square Enix games, for example, that sort of utilize those existing game engines, but then they also try to get out of that, break the idea that it's from that engine, and you have really strong art direction in that sense. And not every company has that capability to do so, the scope or timing. Maybe it's a money thing. And in that sense, I think it's really beautiful to see all these games being sort of the same, and also sad at the same time, right? Because you really want to see games that are unique and different. And at some point, if you see 10 trailers after each other, they sort of blend together, right? Which is sad because each game deserves their own stage.
Agreed.
So in that sense, it's sad. But on the other hand, I'm really happy that there are a lot of developers that are out there that can utilize engines like Unreal Engine 5 now with all their nanite and all the all the rendering capabilities. And of course there's some overlap, but that also means that gamers get more what they want, maybe not in the sense of art direction, but maybe more in the sense of gameplay, which is a trend that you see nowadays, right? Like I said, the audience is maturing. People really start to know what they want. And, there's a sense of less of the blockbuster games and more like we kind of like that, but we want more gameplay. You can really see that in voting, like on Steam, on every platform. You really feel like a cry almost from the gaming community to get more gameplay elements in there. It's something that we also as game developers had to learn the hard way, right?
Yep.
And that's not bad. You can just make a game, and the game has all the right to live in the world, right? Whether it's a good or a bad game, it's really up to the player, unless there are really jarring parts, that you can get out of. But, there are a lot of gamers that really like our games, and some people don't like them because they expected more gameplay out of them, right? So in that sense, I feel like there's a balancing act there that we need to really achieve to get a good game, a good game player sense for what the community likes. But in that sense, I really love the fact that people have such an approachable utility as an engine.
Yeah, I think Unreal Engine 5 pushes a lot right towards realism and a certain kind of graphic. So it does make sense that lots of games have it. And I think it's also that lots of players like ask for it. As in, those games are also the ones that sell the most, right? Because if you see, usually all AAA games have realistic graphics, so that's what sells. So it's good. I agree with this. It's super good that people, small studios, have the possibility to do something like that. But I think it also depends a lot on what kind of game you're making. There are certain games in which realistic graphics make perfect sense, and other games in which sometimes maybe you could do something more, but then you end up with realistic graphics anyway because that's what sells, which can be a bit sad.
Yeah. And then it's the next big thing I think for gaming also is to find a way, or an easier, more approachable way to break those boundaries, right? Like you have your sorry for saying this, it's sort of a swearing word for me, but Genshin Impact, with their, their cartoony art style. And that also probably uses an engine, right? I mean, and there are a lot of examples like that. Unity is, for example, an engine that's super much used for a lot of cartoony game. I think, I'm not, don't quote me on this, but, I think Tunic was also made in Unity. But I mean, there are enough games. Like from the Netherlands, there's this super cool game, it's Pine from Trollbound Studios, which is a really cool game. And it's really, cartoony. But they found a way to utilize the Unity engine to suit their needs. And, it's just really up to every individual game developer to figure out where the balance lies on how far they have to break those boundaries.
I have a question, which is also a little bit like a mini game. Let's say all of the games that have been shown that are coming out this year or later this year, right? We take the 2023 kind of game and we take all of them and we put them together in one big pot and we stir it. And then we get like this one looking thing, right? Just like one game out of them all. Try in 3-4 sentences, describe what is a 2023 era video game looks like in terms of what genre it is, what's the visual style of it, what's the gameplay mechanics are, what's the UI and HUD, and then also what's the story would be. 5 points.
Open world, that's the first one. That's
Open world, combat. Lots of combat.
Okay, lots of combat, great.
Realistic graphics,
Yeah,
I would
of course.
say.
Gotta have those.
About the story, what about the hero?
Oh, right, yeah. So, like, I think this is a really hard thing to get right, but there are hero tropes in games. You're the chosen one, right? You are the ender of all ends, or the bringer of joy, or whatever. You're the
bringer of joy. I love it.
But that's just a thing that always happens in games. Yeah. And one thing, there's also a really great YouTube video about this. But you're also almost exclusively slaying gods. What's up with that? What's up with that?
I never thought about that.
Or maybe it's a person with a god complex, but still, there's more cards. It's
No, yeah.
It's always a recurring theme. So yeah, definitely god complexes. It has to be in there, like a narrative-driven thing with god complexes.
Yeah. I wonder if it's also because since you as the player play, right, and you have all the control, so it's good to be the hero. It's good to have such power, right? So
which is interesting because nowadays you also have a lot of sim games, right? Like your Animal Crossing and stuff like that, where you're not particularly inside the character, right? The form of expression comes from what you do, not from the character that you play, which is very interesting. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of this question.
So we were saying open world, combat, realistic graphics, heroes / slaying gods. What was the last one?
I'm also trying to think of what was the last one was. All right.
I don't think we had it yet. Customizability. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Oh, that's a good one. Character creation. Right. So we have an open world game with lots of combat, which is also, what was it?
Is it realistic graphics and a story
Realistic
about the world?
graphics, story about the guy with the complex, and also it's supposed to have the customizable character. A lot of character creation stuff. Would it be first person or third person?
Third person.
Because otherwise, character creation,
Yeah.
you know.
Because character creation does
It
more.
looks cool, or you need to look at your character and be like, oh, so cool.
I can see so many games that just kind of fit into this criteria right now in my head, and it's just like goes boom, 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 perfect. We don't have really much time left. There are a couple of really big things and big titles that I would also love to discuss with you. Let's start with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. Call of Duty is a game that's been out there for a very long time. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 happens to be a remake of an old game that everybody loved, happens to be also a recurring game that is out there. It also happens to be a franchise that delivers every single year. There is always a Call of Duty game that you have to kind of expect. So my first question would be, what are your thoughts on the games that are out there every year with a new installment? When would you think is the time to stop and say, we've had 39 Call of Duty games and we are not going to like deliver anymore? Or is that something that you think are going to be there till all of the player base eventually dies out? So there's no one else interested in the franchise anymore.
Well, I guess the point depends on from which perspective you look at it, right? Because it keeps selling and people keep buying it. So it makes sense that they keep making them. You can't fault them that, right? They make lots of money off of it. From an artistic maybe point of view, it's a bit, it rarely adds something new. But about this game in particular, I kind of liked it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was not expecting to like it because you know it's a Call of Duty game, whatever. It's always the same, but it actually
they had a lot of cinematic gameplay moments as well. Where you just look at 3 men throwing a rope up a wall, which first of all is super unrealistic in that like height and angle, but it's believable, right?
We didn't think that it was unrealistic.
The circle is round. Believability. Here we go. But that's so cool. It was very like again, another buzzword that we just used, a power fantasy of being a soldier, right? It's not a realistic soldier sense, but it plays in to the idea that you have as a kid what it means to be a soldier. And I think that's very strong in the Call of Duty games. Because nobody's going to go into a warehouse and just shoot everybody down and, roger that, Alpha Team Bravo, go forward and blah. And then all of a sudden you say, the coast is secured. And then people paraglide their way onto the site and they like, what is this situation, right? But it's as a kid, you imagine these things to happen, right? Where you have your Lego blocks and your characters and you just play it out. And that's very strong. And I think very important for games to keep doing, to touch those senses of those childlike senses, right, and keep them tingled. But going back to the fact from doing a yearly release, I think game developers definitely should keep their players interested. But I feel like we, as a game development community, we should stop doing these yearly development cycles because, first of all, as developers, I can strongly say that it's just really not good for the life expectancy of a game developer.
Doing the same game every year. Oh, you're like your
under the same stress
dies.
Yeah, no, so that's not good. But also for the players, at some point, if I can make an anecdote from the 2000s, early 2000s, there were a lot of Mega Man games, and people became a lot of desensitized from that franchise, which actually hurted the Mega Man franchise. And lately, it made a resurgence because there was a huge time gap. Because at some point, Capcom said, "This is not bringing us the money." So they stopped doing it. And at some point, that audience matured. So that was their saving grace. And then they came back with Mega Man. And then it became popular again. And I think we've never seen a Mega Man burst like the early 2000s. again anymore, because I think they've learned, and I think that's important for Assassin's Creed and all the recurring titles to learn as well. I think recently Assassin's Creed also kind of learned from that, from the fact that they now pace it out a little bit more, because if you have yearly income of Assassin's Creed amongst the myriad of games that you still can play otherwise, you're not gonna bother, and it's becoming, you get this feeling of being cheap at some point, right?
Also, it looks to me a bit like also taking advantage, which it's not really like that. But if you keep banking on the fact that people will buy it every year, even if it's always the same, it feels to me not like a very good thing from a moral point of view, because people spend lots of money to play something that is not that different from the one before because of this social phenomenon. And also, people don't have all the time in the world to play games. And if they're going to spend their time always playing the same games, that's not fair.
No.
Not towards the people who keep playing the same thing, but also towards smaller games that don't get the chance to shine.
I love this perspective. It's a lot. For me, it feels like I'm not a big Call of Duty Modern Warfare, big of Call of Duty fan, but my husband is a big fan, and Modern Warfare 3 is what you, Jill, talked about, is what they absolutely adored as children when they were growing up, and this was a big game on them. And it feels like the remake feeds on this feeling of nostalgia. They even marketed it during the Gamescom opening night live, saying, we are bringing your favorite multiplayer maps back. They know exactly what they're doing. They know a lot of people want to see them reworked and better and beautiful and kind of experience it together with friends just like they did back in the day. And it's curious to me because a lot of people said that, oh, that's not really fair. You're kind of like trying to make bank on it, but maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe giving you this feeling of being a child again, of playing soldiers with your best friends together in the evening after work, it kind of what actually helps you, wind down and reminds you why you like video games in the first place, of why you felt this. It's a good perspective that I haven't had before with this conversation that we've had. It's a good one. I thank you for it. Final topic. Cyberpunk, big game, a lot of history towards this game, development, release. We don't have to mention it, everybody knows it. They're releasing a very big update. They're calling it Phantom Liberty. There is going to be a big DLC, but together with the big DLC, there is also going to be a 2.0 version of the game where they have reworked everything. They've reworked their gameplay, they've reworked the weapons, they've reworked ability trees. A lot of things are going to definitely feel different. Oh, the police system that quite a few people have complained about. So I'm certain that it's going to feel like almost a brand new game in terms of gameplay and what you get to see and experience. And I think it's been 3 years since the original release of the game. What are your ideas on this sort of development? Should have Cyberpunk waited 3 years in development and release the game right now, the way they quote unquote meant to be? Or was it okay and fine for them to release the game the way they did it and then spend the last 3 years to rework it?
Well, I think it's the utopia, to release a game that's perfect. Have all the time in the world and release the game exactly when you feel like it's ready. But that's never how it goes, ever. Because especially a game like Cyberpunk, so much money is around it, right? Super big company, a super big game, that lots of people will buy it. You set an expectation, and then you can't go too much beyond that. Like, you can't wait 3 years. If you say that it's going to come out in 2020, then yeah. So I think for sure things could have gone better, but I really respect them for keeping to it and keep working on it and making it better and making it, reach the vision that they had at the start. Because it's clear that they loved the game. They cared about it. And yeah.
I think it is also a distinction to be made here. The developers are not the ones that decide when a game launches, right? So I cannot blame the developers here, at least to a certain extent. There are parties within a good development company that, can have a say. But I think in this sense, there's a little nice thing that in the last years popped up, which is called early access. And I truly believe in the power of early access because you can listen to your community and just keep iterating. And it's also sort of a promise that the game isn't finished yet. You don't have to, release an early access game that's totally broken, but at least with the promise that it is not a fully game yet, because then it's an honest and open approach to doing this. I think I kind of do blame Cyberpunk as a game for the fact that it released as the state as it was, but I do think it's more of a suits problem than a game developer problem. Because a game needs to be released around Christmas, so let's rush the development 3 months up front. And the developers are all passionate people, and they're really trying to do their best. I mean, we both can attest to this. We three can attest to this. We are all in the same boat in that sense. So I feel like we really should cut some slack for the developers here. Because they are the true troopers, and there are people that are higher up that say like, well, we need to release this, but this is going to take so much time. I don't care. Release it in the next month, and that's we want to have all the money from the kids from Christmas, stuff like that, and it just happens, and which is sad. But at the same time, I think from the developer side of point of view, it's also a little bit. I think for trailers and stuff like that, your marketing, just be sure that the player expectation is sort of on par with the game that you are releasing. Because I think setting the expectations too high with a game that's highly anticipated as Cyberpunk. I mean, it definitely doesn't work that they had The Witcher 3 coming before that. So there's definitely an expectancy before the game was even spoken about. The next CG project, the Red game. You had that. So that's living in the shadow of The Witcher already. Then you have the fact that the development time took that long because I think they rebuilt the game at some point entirely in 2016 or something, and then they released later. So, that's already like a huge thing to do, which is already a problem for that game, for the development of that game, I should say. But I think it's okay, but it should never be an excuse.
No, absolutely.
So the 2.0, it's great from the developer perspective, but on the other hand, I would rather, if I pay $60 or $70, it's not a fair thing to release a game in a certain state, right? It needs to be good.
Yeah, I got the game on day one, so yes, absolutely, I agree with that. But also, I think every developer wishes that they could release the game when it's up to their own standards, right?
Yeah, okay, but I think in this sense the DLC also gives the higher ups an excuse to say, oh, but we can patch it up later, and that's unfair. And I think that's both unfair to the players, but also to the developers, right?
Yeah,
so there's like two sides to that coin: one good, one bad.
One good and one bad, but in that case, that I'm very happy that the CD Projekt Red developers had those 3 years to finish up and to actually get their vision out there and to release this big update. The fact that it took such a long time means that they've been really hard at work trying to figure it out and do the things. And we know, and we also know how difficult it can be after the game has released, right? Because it's not quite the same. You cannot work on it as much as you've worked on it before it came out, and there's a lot to it. And I'm quite happy to see this perspective. And to me personally, I guess I would really want to maybe get the player audience a little bit more mature in terms of maybe the industry should be a little bit more transparent in terms of how it works, because they do put a lot of the developers out there on front, and a lot of the developers get hit with stuff, but not many people know what actually is going on behind the closed doors and who makes the decisions. And I feel like whenever the industry becomes a bit more transparent, then people are going to be a bit more mature about how and why things are happening, and then they're going to be more supportive of waiting a little bit in case something happens when the games got released way before it actually was ready to. But it's amazing to see, and Cyberpunk has set a lot of firsts with its release, and it's definitely going to go down in history. And I just really, really hope that 2.0 and Phantom Liberty big update, it's just going to be great. either way, the game's made its name, and it'll forever be something that people are gonna study, and it'll be a big study case. And I guess it achieved. People love it. It's a great universe that has lots of fans all over the world. So
Yeah, honestly, I've never played it yet, so I mean, I can't
You
wait
should.
to start playing it. Right
Yeah.
now that the game is already a little bit better. This is why it's so interesting to have media involved in game development as well. You have your news sites, news outlets, but also forums. People can speak about it, and you can make an informed decision on whether you want to buy a game or not. I mean, I don't want to buy Cyberpunk and then give them an unfair judgment, like, oh, this is a shit game. I mean, if I like a game for what it is, then I will love it regardless, right? If it has bugs or not. But if you go to a news outlet and just first read up on, as a gaming community, we have so many responsibilities to make sure that, these games are well represented. And please, news outlets, please keep doing that because it's important. We really want to play the games that we, as well informed as possible.
Yep.
And otherwise, you're just going to make comments like, I didn't expect this game to be like this. And you're going to vote it down, and that's unfair because it's just not the game. Because you don't expect it, it's not the game. It's all of a sudden a bad game, right? So sorry, a little bit of a tangent, but I thought it was very important to also make that
I think
distinction.
transparency, being honest, is one of the best things you can do in such situations. In most situations, I would say.
Maybe we should look into. Maybe they're already doing it. Maybe like being more transparent. Sorry. Through these news outlets, for example, like getting exclusive scoops, or it's already happening, but being more open could help, I think, in that sense. And maybe there are more outlets that we can just utilize as game developers to do that. I think it's very important to look at Last Epoch as a game, which is very interesting because they have a very community-driven development cycle. So what the players that are invested in that world and the development of it really get the game that they want, which is a very interesting thing.
Yeah. It's a very cool thing that happened. That the game, born of players,
on this beautiful note of us being transparent and the beautiful gaming industry, which is very young, but still we have so much to talk about. It's been beautiful to have this conversation with you. I love to track the evolvement of video games, of how we treat them, of how we cover them, of what to expect from them. And having your perspective and your point of view has been extremely valuable. So thank you both.
Thank you, Lina.
Thank you too.
Thank you so very much for watching us. As Jill said earlier today, if you have not checked out Deliver Smarts yet, check it out on all platforms. Well, not on all. PC, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, PS5 and PS4. Support us. We would really appreciate that. Wonderful people have worked on this game. We have your best interest in mind. And we're very smart. You have just noticed how smart we are. So obviously we made a great game.
Go buy it.
Big brain.
Thank you for being here with me today. Appreciate you.
Thank you for giving us a stage to represent ourselves. It's really nice. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.